welcome to the Earth Feels podcast.
I'm Rose.
And I'm Christine.
Welcome to Earth Feels, the podcast for people feeling overwhelmed by the endlessly gloomy climate news.
Where every week we have soul-based conversations about climate change and explore the idea that climate change may be happening for us as much as it is happening to us.
If you are ready to shift your focus and secure the future for our kids and our grandkids, then this is the podcast for you.
And yes, we do know how to spell.
Hi, Rose.
Welcome, Christine.
Yeah, so nice to be here and seeing you so beautiful in your bright pink.
Pretty in pink, yep.
Absolutely. And I'm so excited to be talking together about Braiding Sweetgrass, which is the novel by Wall Kimmerer. And the subtitle is Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. Now, synchronicity is in play here because we don't touch base as often as we used to when we were chatting every week, sometimes more than once a week. But it turns out we both were reading this book, which came out in 2013. So it's not like it's a brand new book, but it came on our radar at the same time. And we found out we were both reading it.
Yeah, I think that's how the universe in my world talks, and sends me synchronicities. And when we were trying to discuss what we were going to talk about this week, seemed perfect.
Yeah, so our question is a question that Ms. Kimmerer sort of weaves in and out of the book, which is, what does the earth ask of us?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a book that both Rose and I will confess, we're not actually finished it. I thought Rose was finished it, and so I was feeling bad, but I got here and I found out actually I'm a little bit further than you are. I've been listening to the audiobook, which is read by the author, and I put it on every time I go for a walk, my daily walk. And so I'm now on, I think, chapter 24, something like that, but it's just poetry.
And I can see how having it on while you were in nature, because it is so nature-based. I might have to get it on audio now. I don't even have Audible yet. So I'm so behind the times. I like a tactile book. I'm going to be taking a train trip up to Maine at the end of the month. So maybe I'll do it for there. Hopefully
perfect.
I'll be done with the book by then, but I'm reading it really slowly. I'm on my chapter is Harvest Time. The Honorable Harvest. And I'm finding that every chapter, it's not a quick read. It's a slow down and let the words like flow over you kind of read.
Yeah. Kind of absorb, like the water absorbs into the roots of trees.
Mm-hmm.
So Wall Kimmerer is an Indigenous person, part of the citizen Potawatomi Nation, and but she's also a plant scientist, and so she brings these two very different perspectives into this writing, and it hasn't always been an easy journey for her, being Indigenous and going into the field of science. In fact, one of the titles we were considering for this episode was "Why is Life So Beautiful?", which is the question that she felt drew her into the study of botany and plants. And when she told one of her professors that, she was very
shamed.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it took her years to be able to reconcile the fact that, yes, the world is beautiful and I'm drawn to that and it speaks to me.
Mm-hmm.
And this left brain kind of thinking. And that's very much what is woven throughout the book, wouldn't you say?
I would. I think it really speaks to this time where spirituality and science are kind of coming together. And she comes to the world from a knowing in her indigenous ways of what the earth is speaking. And that is totally not a part of the scientific community. Is there any scientific evidence for that? But now science is kind of catching up. It feels like to me. So this book it really resonates at a deep heart level for me. As I spend more and more time in my garden, and more time in nature, I think many of us have found refuge in nature over the last 18 months. And we've slowed down enough to actually listen to what the earth is speaking to us. So it feels like it feels like it's the perfect metaphor for our time. It's science and spirituality coming together.
I think you'll really appreciate one of the things she talks about in an upcoming chapter, which is that the smell of humus, so, the ground deeply composted, as science has shown that it actually interacts with our system and produces oxytocin in the human.
Wow.
Yeah. So isn't that like as if you didn't already know that your garden is where you get grounded and get nurtured? It literally produces that hormone in your body, the nurturing hormone. So I was also going to, before we leave the idea of the science and the Indigenous worldview clashing and now coming together, here's a quote from the book where she writes, "My natural inclination was to see relationships, to seek the threads that connect the world, to join instead of divide. But science is rigorous in separating the observer from the observed and the observed from the observer." And so that's what it has been. Of course, now quantum mechanics / physics is telling us that actually there is no divide, that you can't have an observed effect that isn't affected by the observer. So again, Indigenous wisdom, turns out they knew what they were talking about.
And doesn't that just makes me feel joyous to see this full circle. I mean, to be here at a time where we're coming full circle. A lot of her writing and her pain point about her experiences, her experiences and her grandfather's experiences being taken away from the land and being sent to schools where they cut his hair and gave him a different language and all that, all of those things being lost. You can feel that the pain of that is really palpable. And yet for a white woman, I can't really understand it. I can feel it at a heart level, but I can't really know it in my bones like I'm sure she does. But it has to be her experience of bringing the two together now, coming back to where she started from and having Indigenous knowing actually taking stage again. Maybe it's not front and center yet, but I have to believe Deb Haaland in there is going to change a lot of the interior views. Deb Haaland, for people who don't know, is the Interior Secretary of the United States now in the Biden administration. The first
and
Native
American,
first Native American, first Native American, and the first Native American woman. So bringing a whole different perspective of Earth's wisdom, not man's wisdom, but Earth's wisdom.
Yeah. So you're at the chapter of the honorable harvest. So let's talk about it. So are you at the beginning? Do you know what she's talking about when she talks about the honorable harvest?
Well, I wanted to read this quote from this chapter, and it's a little bit long, but you just read a quote, so I'm doing it. The guidelines of the honorable harvest are not written down or even consistently spoken of as a whole, but they are reinforced in small acts of daily life. If you were to list them, they might look something like this. And there's about 10 of them, so I'm going to read them. Know the ways of the ones who take care of you, so that you may take care of them. Introduce yourself. Be accountable to the one who comes asking for life. Ask permission before taking. Ask permission before taking. Abide by the answer. So, I mean, that in itself is, the answer is not always yes. Never take the first and never take the last. Take only what you need. Take only that which is given. Take never more than half. Leave some for others. Harvest in a way that minimizes harm. Use it respectfully. Never waste what you have taken. Share. Give thanks for what you have been given. Give a gift and reciprocity for what you have taken there. Sustain the ones who sustain you, and earth will last forever. That's like a prayer to me.
And a goal, like to have that, because none of us are there. And she even talks about how difficult it is in this day and age. But I think the idea that sort of underscores the honorable harvest, the principles that you talked about, is really being so aware that what we consume, what each of us consumes, is the gift of another life in some form or another, and that there's a reciprocity there, that when you have been given the gift of a life, whether it's asparagus from our garden, which is beautiful coming up when we get home, or the wild blueberries that I go picking. I'm actually thinking about, how am I going to give a gift back? How am I going to reciprocate for the blueberries that I go picking in the wild? But it's not just in the wild. So
yeah, I would say there was a chapter where she talks about camping with her. It's in the earlier chapters where she talks about going camping with her dad and how he would make coffee over the camp stove and pour the first cup into the earth with gratitude. And I was like, I take my coffee grounds and my tea grounds and I sprinkle them in my lawn and on my garden. And I'm like, I could just make a little prayer out of that. I could make that a ceremony. So it's very, or my eggshells that I crush and I spread out there. I mean, it's like, you gave to me, I'm giving you back. Thank you for what you've given me. And I think that's one of the things that always struck me in Indigenous culture is how they would, when they killed an animal, they would give thanks to the animal for giving its life to feed them. How has that changed with big agriculture and cattle farming and just, slaughterhouses?
Well, I was listening to an interview with the author on CBC, which I'll post in our episode webpage, but she specifically, this idea of the honorable harvest and reciprocity, mentioned fossil fuels and the tar sands. And she said, those were not given. The tar sands were not a gift. We are ripping it. But she said, but sun, wind, so she specifically addressed fossil fuels there. Yeah, she said those are a gift. And we do need energy sources because, obviously we're not going to go back to burning candles or whale blubber. So we do need energy, but how can we get it more honorably, and honorable in a way that honors the life and the lives that are given for us, but also is honorable for us, so we can have integrity. So did you have another quote, or, because I'm interested in exploring a little bit the idea of land as property, which is the settler point of view, the people that came to what the Indigenous people call Turtle Island. now called North America. But the idea that it's property and it's natural resources, and as opposed to the Indigenous point of view, where it was a gift. It again, this idea of reciprocity. I have a quote here from her. In the settler mind, land was property, real estate, capital, or natural resources. But to our people, it was everything. Identity, the connection to our ancestors, the home of our non-human kinfolk, our pharmacy, our library, the source of all that sustained us. It belonged to itself. It was a gift, not a commodity, so it could never be sold. I mean, that's just so different. And I have to give a shout out to my friend Karen Danneman, who's been a guest on our show before. She and I had a conversation probably a year ago already, and she's been telling me and the community here, because we have a Ministry of Natural Resources office here that has told her in the past she can't build a cabin on her family's traditional territory, and she went ahead and built it anyways, and ended up in court and because of it. And so that relationship between Karen and the ministry has evolved, and she's still telling them they aren't resources. We're in relationship to them. That's exactly what Robin Wall Kimmerer says in this book. And I have to say, I didn't really get it at such a deep level, even though Karen's been trying for years. Until I read it.
The human brain, what they say, that you have to have a new idea introduced to it like 7 times before you'll even entertain it. So maybe Robin Wall Kimmerer is this. Maybe this is the 7th time.
Maybe. Well, I think it's a little bit more. And I have to say that because of Karen's persistence, she now is invited to teach the firefighters that come up every summer about the relationship, Indigenous relationship to the land. So things are changing, but it's clearly such a different way of viewing things that as settlers, which you and I are, it's hard to wrap our heads around. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. I think it goes back to one of the things that she says in her opening chapter is the story of creation, and how even if we're not believers in whatever dogma is out there, we still are. It's still in our subconscious. It's in our consciousness. And the difference between the story of Sky Woman falling and coming to the earth and creating the earth with the help of all the animals and mud and dancing and thankfulness, gratitude to the animals for giving her, and bringing seeds from the sky with her and creating, versus Eve, of Adam and Eve, being banished and being forced to, the rest of her life, by the sweat of her brow, earn her keep, as opposed to being given. So it's two different women, same planet, same species, but two different lenses.
Oh, I mean, the tenor of the dancing the world into being versus you've sinned because you ate from the
I can just see
of
that
the knowledge of good and evil. Yeah, and that arm point, you're out of here.
With a finger, you're out.
Yeah.
And no forgiveness, no, and so the need to be perfect all the time, and just the need to work hard, and not a gift. So So getting back to our question,
in fact, being punished for
being punished for eating an apple. Whatever that whatever that means to you. Yes, whatever that represents to you, but being punished for the fruit of knowledge, as opposed to being thankful and letting everything just come to you. It's the difference between, on my spiritual path, it's the difference between pushing against and flowing with. I mean, it has that same kind of energy. And our Western culture is push, 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 make it happen, make it happen, make it happen, versus lying back and just letting the flow of life take you and trusting in that flow.
Yeah. And for me, it's really the left brain, right brain split as well, right? The left brain is the pusher, and the right brain. I was just listening to Jill Bolte Taylor discuss her new book.
Okay. She's the woman who had the brain.
Yes, that's right. She's a brain scientist, and she had a stroke at the age of 37. And then after that, she wrote My Stroke of Insight, which is about that. But she's written another book, which maybe we'll have to discuss on another episode. But it's again that, so when her left brain basically died with that stroke, as a brain scientist, she was watching it and observing it and able to, because she did recover, took her 8 years to be fully recovered, but she remembered it, and that's what she wrote about. But when she was connected to her right brain, she said it was just this sense of being connected to everything, and there were no boundaries, and it was just bliss, basically. So when I hear you and talking about the two creation stories and Robin Kimmerer writing and Braiding Sweetgrass, that really is. I actually recently had the experience, because, I'm an energy healer, but part of my path is also receiving healing. And I had this amazing healing session that left me for the first time. And I'd never realized how dominated by my left brain I am, because I think I'm quite intuitive, but it left my left brain offline for a few days. And it was an experience of such relaxation and expansiveness, and that exactly what you were talking about, that push to do, because I'm kind of a doer, and it just wasn't there. Not that I didn't do anything. I got up in the morning, I did, but so that idea that we can all step into that connection, because it's innate in all of us, but it's been schooled and beaten out of us in this Western culture. And so I think you were going to bring the conversation back to the question, what does the earth ask of us? And what would you say the book?
Oh, there's so many lessons that the earth gives us. I think the number one is to slow our pace, and that every season of the earth has its own time. Just like the seasons that we live our life. And I'm not talking I am talking youth and adulthood and then, cronehood or whatever. I'm talking that too. But I'm talking about even on a daily basis. I mean, there are times that you blossom like the spring. And there are times that you just, you ride that blossom. The summer, you're just there in all your glory. And then there's the fall where you start to go in a little bit again and you start to quiet down. And then there's the winter where you sit in quiet and contemplate. That can happen on a daily basis. That doesn't have to be spread out over a year. So it's that the energy of the earth, can we tune into that energy and incorporate it in our daily lives? So listening's a big, big part of it. Fierce listening to what's being said as well as to what's not being said in words. Certainly reciprocity.
Yes.
Reciprocity. And I have to say, on a personal level, as I get older, I am less and less willing to engage in relationships that aren't reciprocal. So I can only imagine how Mother Earth feels and how frustrated she must be with the extraction model that Western man has, and the unwillingness to share with not only with each other, not only with our own species, but with every other sentient species, with every other sentient being. We go into the ocean and we take.
Yeah.
Not giving anything back.
Yeah. I was thinking of,
Gratitude. I mean, there's so many lessons. I could go on.
Mhm.
There's so many.
And I was thinking, because I live in Treaty 3 territory in Northern Ontario, and much of the treaty promises haven't been kept, but it's a conversation that's come to the surface now, and we're all settlers and Indigenous people are working on a new relationship, where settlers become allies rather than takers. But I think about the trauma that has happened to the Indigenous people in my area and certainly around Turtle Island, where things were taken in that they were sent to residential school and all of that. They lost their identity, but more sort of at a basic level, the idea that their whole way of being was rooted in honoring the earth and all the relations and reciprocity and the honorable harvest and Thanksgiving. And then these Europeans come in and show no understanding of that reciprocity. No, because if you think about it, I mean, every Thanksgiving in both Canada and the US, it's about how, at least here in Canada, I understand. I mean, the early settlers, the early Europeans were helped by the natives, or they wouldn't have survived the first winters.
Exactly.
And so they helped us, and that reciprocity has just been shredded. And the idea that what we are doing in northern Alberta and the tar sands to extract resources, and I'm doing that in quotation marks, it's just so brutal. And they must have been going, well, because there's this trauma of like your whole way of life not only being destroyed, but then apparently they're like thriving, these people that come and don't express gratitude and don't have a reciprocal relationship, and they're thriving and multiplying, and they've taken over. Well, guess what? Time to pay the piper for all of us.
Yeah. And how amazing that the Indigenous cultures have been so decimated, and not just here in the Americas. I mean, I visited Australia and New Zealand,
Right.
and down there,
Pretty much wherever the Europeans went.
Absolutely. But they still were able to hold on to their wisdom, and they are the wisdom keepers.
Much of their wisdom. Yeah, much of their wisdom. It's sad to hear how many of their languages have been lost, and that's a whole other discussion of language. It's so rich. We might have to talk about that again. The fact that there's no it in Potawatomi, like there's no, and how that objectifies in English, how you can, it's only humans that are
that
not
he and
it's.
she. Yes. Yeah.
And that's, but I think we probably need to start wrapping it up.
So you have some good news?
I do.
A whole list of good news.
I do. Good climate news this week. Number 1, Spain bans new coal, gas, and oil.
Yes.
Development. Woohoo! Number 2, I don't know how much we've talked about the IEA's report, which just came out in the last week, so probably not much. No. The International Energy Agency says no more fossil fuel projects. That has a global impact. I mean, it seems obvious to you and me, right? And to our listeners, why would we even need to say that? But it needs to be said, and by people who carry the weight that the IEA does. G7 has voted to stop international funding for coal. Hopefully that they actually follow through. The UK bans the sale of peat from 2024. One wonders why it can't do it right away, but apparently it's going to happen in 2024. And your President Biden orders US agencies to mitigate climate risks.
He's giving huge money to FEMA in advance of hurricane season, preparing, asking communities to get prepared for what
Wow.
coming.
What a thought to actually get prepared beforehand.
Proactive instead of reactive. Woohoo!
And last but not least, the EU has just approved $21 billion for a green transition. So
Lots going on.
There's a lot going on. And I think for our
Action step.
Thank you. Action step. I was going to talk about our
Sanity tip.
Yes. Besides obviously recommending reading.
Well, that's what I would say. The action step should be is if you can get your hands on this book, if you can listen to it on Audible, it will change your perspective.
Yeah.
It gives a long history of unfortunate events for the Indigenous, but it's written in such a hopeful manner, and it tells this one woman's story of leaving the Indigenous culture, coming to the Western, and then going back to the Indigenous culture and being able to take her knowing and teach it to her students, who will then go out and spread it farther.
It's beautiful. And if you have read it, and a shout out to my friends Lisa and Tanis, who recommended it to me and got me reading it, recommend it to somebody else or share your copy. Or
I've already got three different people that I'm like, you have to read this. You have to read this.
And I would say for our sanity tip, was it our sanity tip or our action tip? Because
action step.
Okay, because for me, they're kind of combined, because actually reading this book will support your sanity in that, not that you read it and go, wow, everything's okay and I can relax, but it gives you a glimpse into the world that could be if we respond to this emergency. And I would just relate a little story that I heard the author tell in an interview about, she apologized to her students basically because Kimmerer went to the very first Earth Day 50 years ago, but she feels deeply that it didn't do much, like we're still in crisis. And one of her students came up to her after, a young woman, and said, it is a time, I think I'm going to tear up a bit, but it's a time of crisis and such great purpose. And I guess Kimmerer had used the image of a teeter-totter, like we're teetering on the brink of such devastation on one side. But, and this young woman said, at this time, with this teeter-totter, everything I do makes a difference.
That does. Yeah, it hits my heart. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so we can help that teeter-totter come down on the side of life.
Yeah.
So I would take that as our action, but also our sanity tip. And she said also that this time calls for interdependence and compassion for each other. And so for ourselves and for each other. So we highly recommend the book, Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Thank you, Ms. Kimmerer, for giving this gift to us, to the world.
Incredible. Thank you. That's this week's Friday episode of Earth Feels. Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use song for the ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for me.